So before we get started, I wanted to mention something called negative space. And when you're drawing a hand, I think that negative space is one of the most important things to keep in mind, because if you don't have the right amount of negative space in between your fingers, at the end of the fingers, around your hand, the hand can look really wonky like a lot of hands do. That's why hands are so hard. So if your negative space looks something like this, you know that it's not very good. You want your negative space when you're drawing to look something like this. It will stop your hand from looking out of proportion. Alright, so let's get started. Alright, so because my camera wasn't working for the first part, I'll explain what I've done so far. I've basically just looked at the space around the hand that I was drawing because I used an image, a reference photo from Google. I looked at the negative space around the side of the hand and kind of just made that my starting line. When you're drawing a hand, if it still doesn't look right, something that you can do is for the proportions, you can draw kind of a stick figure hand and draw the skin around that. That might help. Another thing that you should keep in mind when you're drawing a hand is that it's okay if it doesn't look perfect the first time that you do it. In this example, I think I erased the fingers that I'm drawing now and redid them like 2 or 3 times because they didn't look right to me, and that's totally fine. So when you're drawing a hand, I think you really need to keep in mind where the light source is coming from, because if you don't, your hand can turn up really unrealistic and shaded all over, looking really flat. So for example, in this picture, the light source is kind of coming from where the index finger is, so kind of from the left-hand side. So anything that is being covered by something or further away from the light source would be shaded darker. For example, the 3 fingers in between the index finger and the thumb are shaded darker because the light would not be able to hit them. Another thing to keep in mind when you're drawing something that's realistic in general, sometimes you might see that there's a shadow where you don't think a shadow should be. Try not to trust yourself, trust the photo, and shade where the shadow is in the picture. For example, on the thumb, there is a shadow going down the middle. That might not be common sense to you, but it is where the shadow is in the picture that I was looking at, so I did it. And it ended up making the thumb look more realistic. Eventually you will not need to look at a photo to know where the shadow is, and it will be common sense to you on where the shadow will be, but for now, if you don't know exactly where you should put the shading, then you should look at a photo and trust the photo. just trying to create more depth and making the shading a little darker. Here's the finished result. Hopefully it helped you not draw blobs or spikes for fingers, and you learned a little bit about negative space. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.